The strangest part was not that they disappeared. The strangest part was that, in each case, someone heard them walking back. Ranger Osvaldo Trentham had worked the backcountry sector of Olympic National Park for 11 years before the first disappearance he could not explain away. He had filed 14 missing person reports in his career. 9 were resolved within 72 hours. A twisted ankle, a miscalculated trail, a tourist who wandered toward the Hoh River because the sound of moving water felt like direction. 3 others resolved themselves in the way that no one in his profession liked to write down in official language. Recovered remains, cause of death consistent with exposure, families notified. 1 was never found, a college student named Beryl Ashcroft, who vanished in the summer of 2009, and whose case file Osvaldo still kept in a paper folder in the bottom drawer of his desk at the Hurricane Ridge station. He kept it because he had the specific and undisclosable feeling that understanding what happened to Beryl Ashcroft was a matter of personal importance, though he could not have said why. The 14th case was the one that changed him. It was October 14th, 2019. He remembered the date not because it was the day Mauricio Veldhuis disappeared, but because it was the day the temperature dropped 14 degrees in less than an hour, and the barometric pressure fell in a way that made the old digital display at the ranger station flicker twice before stabilizing. Osvaldo had noted it in the margin of a supply log, the way rangers note small things that feel anomalous without rising to the level of actual concern. A habit of documentation. He had been doing it for so long that the habit had become a form of perception. Mauricio Veldhuis was 44 years old, a cartographic analyst from Bellingham who had submitted his trail permit 3 days in advance, as required. He listed his intended route as the Seven Lakes Basin Loop, a 15-mile circuit that experienced hikers could complete comfortably in 2 days. He had provided an emergency contact, his sister, Gretna Veldhuis, who worked as a claims adjuster in Tacoma, and who would, 5 days later, call the station to ask why her brother had not responded to her messages. In the photograph on his permit, Mauricio had a slightly asymmetrical beard, narrow shoulders, and the expression of someone who spent most of his time in front of screens and was quietly proud of the hours he spent outside. Osvaldo walked the first 3 miles of the Seven Lakes Basin Trail himself on the afternoon of October 15th. The trail was damp from 2 days of intermittent rain. The soil held impressions well. He noted boot tracks consistent with recent foot traffic, but could not confirm they were Mauricio's specifically, since the trail serviced multiple hikers per day, even in mid-October. What he found at the 3.2-mile marker, a wooden post he had helped install in 2013, with a yellow reflective strip that had faded to the color of old bone, was a single trekking pole planted vertically in the center of the trail. It had been inserted into the soft earth at a precise 90-degree angle, as though someone had stopped, pushed it in deliberately, and kept walking. The strap was still looped around nothing. The basket was embedded exactly to its diameter, no deeper. It was not the act of someone who had fallen or panicked. It was the act of someone marking a spot. Osvaldo photographed it. He noted it in his log. He told himself the pole was the kind of thing hikers did. Adjusted gear, set something down, forgot it, kept moving. He told himself this with the specific confidence of a person who does not entirely believe what he is saying. The search began on October 17th. Osvaldo led the grid team personally. By the second day, they had covered every switchback of the Basin Loop in a half-mile radius on either side. They found his tent, pitched at the designated camping area near Lunch Lake, correctly staked, bare canister locked, and undisturbed 6 meters from the site. Sleeping bag still laid out inside as though he had stepped away for a moment and not yet returned. His boots were outside the tent door. That detail did not make the official report in the way Osvaldo wrote it in his personal log. The official report said personal effects and camping equipment were found at campsite, subject absent. Osvaldo's personal log said his boots were outside the tent as if he had taken them off before entering, but he was not inside, and the ground around the tent showed no barefoot impressions, which is not possible if he walked away after removing them. And if he did not walk away after removing them, then he did not walk away at all, which is also not possible because he was not inside the tent. He did not finish the entry. He closed the notebook and put it in his jacket pocket and continued the search. Mauricio Veldhuis was never found. Gretna Veldhuis called the station twice in the months after the search was officially suspended. She was composed on both calls, in the way that Osvaldo recognized as the composure of someone who had already done most of their grieving in private. On the second call, she mentioned something she had hesitated to include because it seemed irrelevant. She said that on October 16th, the evening before the official search began, she had heard footsteps on the exterior stairs of her apartment building in Tacoma. She lived on the third floor. The stairs were external, metal, and loud. She said she had heard someone walk up all 3 flights in a slow and very regular rhythm, pause outside her door for approximately 30 seconds, and then walk back down. She had looked through the peephole. There was no one on the landing. She had assumed it was a neighbor who had gone to the wrong floor and had thought nothing of it until the search confirmed her brother was missing. She did not know why she was mentioning it. Osvaldo thanked her and told her she was right to mention everything, even things that seemed irrelevant. He did not tell her that he had noted an anomaly in his own log the same evening, that when he drove back to the Hurricane Ridge station, he had heard, from somewhere in the tree line adjacent to the parking lot, a sound he could only describe as footsteps, pacing at regular intervals. Not an animal sound, which he knew well, but a rhythmic compression of undergrowth that did not change pace or direction over the 2 minutes he stood beside his truck listening. It had stopped the moment he started the engine. He said nothing because there was nothing actionable to say. The second disappearance happened in a different park, in a different state, in a different year, and Osvaldo would not have known about it at all if he had not been corresponding, irregularly and informally, with a backcountry ranger from the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas named Philomena Krause. They had met at a wilderness search and rescue conference in Boise in 2017 and had exchanged emails 3 or 4 times a year since then. The way people in insular professional communities maintain connections with the rare colleagues who seem to be thinking about the same things. Their correspondence was largely mundane. Gear recommendations, bureaucratic frustrations, the particular exhaustion of managing trails that received insufficient federal funding. Occasionally, it was not mundane. Philomena wrote to him in March 2021 about a case that had been formally closed as a drowning, despite the fact that no body had been recovered and the nearest significant water source was 4 miles from where the missing person's vehicle had been found. The missing person was a woman named Callaway Bretch, 61 years old, retired librarian, who had been hiking the Buffalo River Trail near the Steel Creek campground since her late 30s. She had hiked it alone every spring for 22 years. Her car was found at the Steel Creek trailhead on April 8th. Her phone was inside it, locked, with a half-composed text message to her daughter that read, "Only, walking the usual, back by, no time, no period, no further text." The message had not been sent. The timestamp on the draft was 7:43 in the morning. She had been seen at a gas station in Boxley Valley at 6:55. The distance from the gas station to the trailhead was 11 miles, which fit the timing with ordinary driving. Philomena wrote that the part she could not include in the official report was the following. When the search team arrived at Steel Creek on the morning of April 9th, one of the volunteers, a retired school teacher named Doric Halm, who had been doing trail volunteer work in the area for 15 years, told Philomena, quietly, at the edge of the parking lot, that the previous evening, around dusk, he had heard someone walking the trail from south to north, which was the direction back toward the trailhead. He had been doing maintenance work near the second river access point. He said the footsteps were steady and unhurried. He had called out, assuming it was a late hiker, and the footsteps did not stop or slow. He watched the trail for 3 minutes, and no one emerged from the tree line onto the section he could see. He had gone home because it was getting dark and he was cold. He had told himself he must have misjudged the sound. What bothered Philomena was not that the footsteps had not produced a person. What bothered her was the rhythm. Doric Halm had said, when pressed, that the footsteps had a rhythm that was regular to the point of being metronomic. He was a former music teacher. He said it was like someone walking to a click track, which was not how people walked when they were tired at the end of a long day on uneven terrain. He said it was regular in a way that real walking was not regular. Callaway Bretch was never found. Osvaldo filed Philomena's letter in the same drawer as Beryl Ashcroft's folder. He was aware that he was constructing something, though he could not have said what. He was aware that the act of filing these papers together was itself a form of argument, even if the argument was only with himself. The third case he knew about because he was present. It was June 2022. A 29-year-old man named Alexander Knorr had been hiking the Wonderland Trail in Mount Rainier National Park, a 93-mile circuit that serious hikers planned years in advance. Alexander had applied for his permit in November 2021. He was a software infrastructure engineer from Portland, hiking solo. He had all the appropriate gear, had completed a skills assessment, and had checked in at the White River Wilderness Information Center on June 3rd, day one of his 14-day permit. On June 9th, he failed to check in at the designated midpoint confirmation station. This triggered the standard protocol. Osvaldo was working an interagency support rotation at Rainier that month, and he was part of the team that went out on June 10th. They found Alexander Knorr's pack on the morning of June 11th at a point on the trail approximately 2 miles north of the Carbon River crossing. The pack was not dropped or thrown. It was placed against a trailside tree with careful deliberateness. Shoulder straps facing outward, hip belt buckled closed. Nothing was missing from the pack except Alexander himself. All food, all shelter, all navigation tools. His satellite communicator was in the top pocket, battery at 62%, with a sent message log that showed a brief confirmation ping transmitted to the registration service at 7:12 a.m. on June 9th, and then nothing. Osvaldo crouched beside the pack for a long time without touching it. What he noticed first was the smell. Not decomposition, not blood, not anything that would have a place in a search and rescue protocol. It was a smell he could not immediately identify, and then, slowly, could. It was the smell of the interior of a building, a specific kind of institutional interior, like a library or a school. The smell of recycled air and old paper and many people passing through a space over many years. It was the smell of an inside, here in the middle of an outside, in a forest through which no wind was currently moving. It was a smell that could not logically be there. He did not write it in his official log. He noted it in his personal notebook, in handwriting smaller than usual, the way he had learned to record the things that had no official category. The search lasted 6 days. Osvaldo walked more miles of that trail than any other member of the team. On the 4th day, in the late afternoon, near a section of trail that passed through a dense stand of silver fir at an elevation of approximately 4,400 feet, he heard something. He stopped walking. He stood very still. It was footsteps, behind him on the trail. A steady, metronomic rhythm at walking pace on a surface that was returning no echo, coming closer. He turned around. The trail was empty for as far as the tree line allowed him to see, which was perhaps 40 feet. The footsteps did not stop. They continued at the same pace, the same rhythm, the same metronomic regularity that Dora Calm had described to Philomena, and that Philomena had described to him. They came closer. He could feel, though this was not something he would ever say aloud to anyone, the specific and physical sensation of proximity. The footsteps reached the place where he was standing and passed through it. He heard them continue ahead of him on the trail, maintaining the same pace, receding in the direction he had been walking. He stood on the trail for what he estimated was 3 minutes. Then he turned and walked back toward the Carbon River crossing, without increasing his pace, because he understood, with a certainty that had no rational basis and required none, that an increase in pace would constitute a form of communication he did not want to initiate. Alexander Knorr was never found. Osvaldo retired from Olympic National Park in February 2024. He still lives in the peninsula. He still hikes. He told one person the full account, a journalist named Tavish Grell, who was writing a piece on long-term wilderness search and rescue workers for a regional magazine. The piece was never published. Tavish Grell told Osvaldo in a phone call 6 months after their interview that the magazine had declined it, not for any editorial reason, but because Tavish himself had requested the piece be pulled after something had happened during his research that he declined to describe in specific terms. He said only that he had been reviewing his recorded interviews late one night in his apartment in Seattle, and that at the end of the recording of Osvaldo's account, after Osvaldo had said goodbye and ended the call, there was an additional 47 seconds of audio. He said the audio contained, very clearly, the sound of footsteps. He said they had a regular rhythm. He said they did not stop. If this story settled somewhere in your chest that ordinary reading doesn't reach, there are more accounts waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave a like if you made it all the way here.